advice about pursuing graduate programs was I was thinking about law school or something else, but she steered me to pursuing a master's in public administration and policy, which I've never looked back from that advice, but that was from her time at Wesleyan. I'll give a couple other ones that don't necessarily overlap here, but do go back to a long-serving professor who I think Gina probably knows. Ernest Brody was not only a great professor of mine who pushed me when I thought I knew more things than I did know, but she also became that guiding force through my journey professionally. And similar to Frank's comment about staying in touch, unfortunately she passed away about a year ago, but I stayed in touch with her for all my time post Wesleyan. So this goes from the late 80s through just a few years ago, including getting to know her family really well. And her birthday was on Valentine's Day for many years. If I was in the state of Connecticut, I would take her out for lunch, which she enjoyed, and I think I got more out of that relationship over time. But you also know that, like, as I'm mentioning names, many of them have been women, have been strong women in my life. Yelena, Ernest, and the other person I would just say, just to shout out, I lost my mom when I was 21 years old, but she was a first grade teacher. And when I think about my journey in education and the ability to impact lives, that started from watching her change lives every day in a public school system in Hartford, Connecticut. So those are just a few people that I've referenced, but I will tell you that mentorship relationships have been integral to my development, my success, and I look forward to giving back consistently.
Thank you very much. And I think from both of your responses, for me personally, I'd like to figure out what does it mean? What is the relationship between a mentor and a mentee? How frequently should they be contacted? And what does it mean? What does it mean to have a mentor to you?
Go ahead.
He was that. So my thought on this is there's really no guide to how it works. I love to hearing from Frank that he stays in touch on a regular basis. He's meeting monthly. I guess I'm not as scheduled or disciplined as that. So Frank, kudos to you on that one. But what I will say is, I think you got to think about this as a give and take relationship or as a friendship. As a friend, there are times when you can go long periods of time without connecting. But as soon as you come together, it's like instant. And I think of friendships as I think of my mentor. So I have a mentor that's a current president now that I worked for a number of years. We don't get together often, but when we do, it is such a powerful connection, and we have so many similar traits. Our families are connected, but I also try to think about things that I think he would want to know. So sometimes it's things about something that I've done that's worked out really well. I'll send a little note, or I know his birthday's coming up, so I have a tickler in my system to make sure I reach out just to say hello. If there are opportunities where I'm in a various part of the country where I know he is, we try to connect. But it's in addition to kind of knowing the value of what you receive in that relationship, it's also just trying to be there for them too. And maybe this is slightly different, but I think it goes to the importance of being able to stay connected. In leadership positions, and I'm sure many of you in the room know this too, that sometimes the work that you do and the spaces that you're in can be lonely. And so knowing that your mentor your mentor, the people that you're trying to connect with, may be feeling and facing those same things. So the ability to kind of stay connected, just to say hello, means a lot. And the last thing I'll say, and it's okay just to thank your mentor. You know, thank the people that have meant so much to you, because they don't often hear it. And so, you know, any opportunity you can share that, I think it's really powerful. So.
Yeah, I'll pick up from the thank you part. I had an experience a couple weeks ago. I was at a national conference in the U.S. with over 14,000 participants. And a young man walked up to me and asked me if I remembered him. And I looked at him and I said, "You look familiar, remind me your name." And he told me his name. And it still didn't click. And then he said, "I met you almost 10 years ago on a cruise in Antigua." It was a boat ride in Antigua where my family's from. And I stopped him when I met him on the cruise because he was reading a book. And I noticed the book. And that led to a conversation about whether or not he had thought about going to graduate school. And he said, "No." So he comes up and he opens his wallet and he pulls out the card that I gave him. He had been carrying this card. And he's in his 3rd year in a PhD program. And soon will be graduating with his doctorate. And that little conversation that we had, that chance meeting, was enough for him to pursue his dreams, right? And so mentoring can be this long, sustained relationship, but it can also be these intimate moments where you meet someone for a few minutes and you recognize their humanity, right? And you speak something into their existence that they follow, right? So it doesn't have to be this formal, kind of structured relationship. There's this concept of inspirational mentors or aspirational mentors. They can be people that you haven't actually physically met, or you met for a short time, but you read something they wrote, you saw something they said, and that inspires you. Connection to them. So that, to me, was just an unbelievable story, and being able to see what this young man is doing with his work and what he will be doing in the future. And all I did was have a brief conversation.
I think I had a very structured view for what mentorship is, and both of your experiences literally shattered it completely. Because now I'm thinking of remembering every single small and minute conversation I've had, and I'm recognizing how each of them, as frequently or as less frequently as it happens, has influenced me. I think on this note, I'm going to be sending a lot of thank you emails.
Happy birthday.
That's right.
So I imagine that you guys have been through a lot of tough situations in your experiences, and I want to understand how you've chosen between being bold, assertive, being tough, and choosing to be deeply human and empathetic. And I also want to know how your mentors came into such decision making and what advice you can give them. And one more thing, and also, and I also want to know if there was any advice that you received which has completely challenged all your current thoughts or beliefs towards that situation.
Yeah.
Frank, hold on 1 second. I think there's a microphone. Andy, can you hear well?
I'm leaning in trying to hear.
There's a much.
You can turn up the volume a little bit, that'd be great. Sorry. I'm turning my ear like that's gonna help.
You look like you're on the edge of your seat.
I am. Much better, much better.
Okay,
That's
awesome. I think
good.
it's good.
So I think I'll repeat the question for you, Andy.
Oh, great, thank you,
Awesome.
okay.
So I imagine that both of you have gone through a lot of tough situations where you had to choose between being bold, assertive, brave, and being deeply human or empathetic. So I wanted to understand how you have tackled the situation and the kind of advice you received from your mentors, and if the advice you received has occasionally been very challenging to your current thoughts about the situation.
Oh, great, thanks for repeating it. So I'm gonna give an example of advice that I received, but I actually chose a different path, right? So sometimes, you know, this is one of those moments where you gotta listen to everything. At least I try to listen to all advice and all kind of ideas. But ultimately, you've got to figure out what's going to be right for you and who you are as a leader. And I love the way you describe being bold and assertive. You know, when I think about leading a small college in the U.S., which, you know, it's a competitive landscape. Um, there are over 4,500 institutions across the country in the United States. And there are a lot of schools that are closing or struggling. And in working at one institution, your ability to be bold and aggressive meant that we saw a lot of turnover in the staff, meaning people didn't last long. They were there 2-3 years, and then they either let go or fired or pushed out, or and it created a culture where you either succeeded or you didn't. And if you didn't succeed, you were pushed out and you were replaced with someone better. And the one of the ways that particular institution was able to thrive was they were able to actually pay for talent from all across the globe to come. And it was this kind of churn and burn type of mentality. And the outcomes of that organization were incredible. Like, you could not argue for the success that they were having. I was a part of that, but I also knew that that type of culture wasn't the type of culture that I wanted to emulate. So when I would have the ability to kind of lead on my own, I tried to take pieces of what I saw as being important. Some of the things that I saw as being important were what I refer to as messy leadership. So if you have a senior team and let's say Frank, as you heard, he's the chief diversity officer, you know, he probably knows more about kind of changing and moving and creating cultures within organizations more than anyone. But on a senior team, what I would say is, I want to know as much about what Frank is thinking, but if Gina's on that team too, I want to know what her thoughts are. I want to get everyone's view, because at the end of the day, you're stronger together, right? Having more input, I think, is going to be something that's going to produce greater results. And being willing to listen, and also being vulnerable to share exactly what you're thinking in that moment, I think is really powerful. That creates, I think, positive things. I will also just say, as a final part of this, I have seen lots of success, you know, trying to be bold, assertive, leading a team, without creating that turn and burn. The thing I will also say, though, I have not found at this moment, the pace of change has not been at the same pace as it was in that previous environment. So there's certain things that you may have to forego, but I would argue that having a leadership team where you're able to have empathy, people have grace in terms of their ability to share, a willingness to be vulnerable, to make mistakes and realize you're not going to get fired because of it. I think that type of environment is much better, at least for me. But those are things that I was able to kind of have open conversations with. And And quite frankly, in chatting with my mentor, one of the things we talked about openly was there are gonna be some things that he's gonna say that I'm gonna wanna try to emulate. And there are gonna be other things that I'm gonna toss out. And that's okay too, but at the end of the day, you're trying to figure out what's best for you. Like what's gonna be best for your kind of spirit, your soul to be able to move forward in a way that's compassionate, that's that's inspiring, that's that gets people involved to want to run with you versus run away.
I love that, Andy. Run with me instead of running away. I'm reminded of an experience. I had another experience last year where I was a part of a group of colleagues who were hosting a conference at another institution outside of the U.S. So we brought together about 50 colleagues from around the world to join us for a summit. It's called the I Care for Justice Summit. And we're at the host institution, and it's the opening session, and as we're about to get started, protest shows up. Or I'll call it activism shows up at our event. Loud chants, chanting, being requested to be heard. And we were faced with a decision on what to do in that moment. And the traditional administrator in me wanted to ignore what was happening outside. And the activist scholar in me wanted to invite them in to the session. And the way we came to a decision on what to do was I had a trusted team of folks who were the co-organizers of the conference. And they reminded me that the frameworks that the conference is built on only would lead you to one solution, and that was to invite them in. The problem was it wasn't our institution, right? And so we had to rely on our relationships of our colleagues. We had to ensure that the decision we made was not going to impact those who would still be there once we left. And it turned out to be the best decision. And I bring that up to say if I was left to my own demise, I would have probably taken a safe route, or what seemed to be safe. But I leaned into my colleagues. I trusted their advice. And together we came up with a decision that made the most sense based on our values and principles for what was right to do in that moment. And so our speaker earlier today talked about who you surround yourself is so important, right? And if I had a different team, if I had just relied on, I'll call them the keepers of the academy, it would have been an entirely different outcome. And we would have missed a valuable learning opportunity. So sometimes you have to show vulnerability by rejecting your impulses and listening to those who you trust and following the kinds of values and principles that you hold near and dear to your work.
Thank you very much, Andy. Thank you very much, Frank. Both of you mentioned some very interesting anecdotes, which leads me to wonder. Obviously, there are many situations where you have to make tough decisions. So I wanted to understand who helped you when times were tough, when you were overwhelmed. Who was there for you? Who did you turn for to take an overwhelming decision with clarity?
Let me start with this one, Andy, because I'm reminded of what you said earlier around the higher up you go in an organization. As you all lead your own organizations or you lead someone else's organization, you'll realize the higher you climb, the more isolating it becomes. And so for me, I had to make sure I had colleagues outside of the institutions that I worked for that I could depend on and trust. And so I have a network on speed dial that I will call and talk through big decisions, whether they're professional or personal. And that's my go-to. I need to talk through, similar to Andy, have a clear sense of what the potential various options are, and collectively, with my trusted confidant, come to a decision about what's the right plan of course. The challenge with that, and Andy pointed this out as well, it takes a little bit longer to come to some decisions, but I do think that that's time well invested, and that if you don't have the trust circle within your organization, make sure you have it outside of your organization, because you will make much more informed decisions by being able to connect with those folks on a regular basis.
Yeah, it's a great point. Maybe I'll pick up on the trust part, and I'll add trust and transparency. I mean, I think it's important to have a group of trusted colleagues or friends. But the only way that someone can truly help you is if you give them the full story, right? You know, we all want to kind of sugarcoat certain things or share a story based upon your belief, but the better that you can give all those details, your mentor, your colleague, your friend can give you good advice. So when I say the trust and transparency, you know, whatever the problem or the challenge is, you know, try to frame it in such a way that provides all sides of the issue from your perspective, right? You give it, and then you listen to as many kind of folks as you can. One of the things that I do when I have difficult decisions, as Frank mentioned, I have a small group of trusted friends. Some of them were classmates at school. Some of them are sitting college presidents today that I have good relationships with. And they're like-minded in the sense that they're kind of alone too, but what you quickly realize is that they're very willing to share. And I know sometimes you have this, you might have a sense of fear of picking up the phone or writing that email, but people want to help you, and you just have to kind of lean in those moments. And this goes back to that a willingness to be vulnerable. And if they're truly your mentor, they're truly your trusted friend and colleague, they will receive that information in a way and then be able to give you guidance based upon what you're sharing. So trust and transparency, I think, are two pieces of that puzzle.
Thank you very much. I think I'm saying thank you a lot. But it's obviously after
Well, thank you.
Both of you have led teams and communities. Both of you have had a lot of experiences, right? And I think it goes to say that there has to be a lot of work in your day-to-day in order to maintain what you guys have talked about, the trust, the transparency. In a session earlier, Frank talked about radical honesty, which I've taken note of and I intend to read thoroughly about later on. But how can you create that space in the day-to-day when you're in a team?
Well, maybe I'll start with that one. So I have a weekly senior staff meeting, and I'm smiling because I'm certain that at times my colleagues will say it's too long. But so imagine this. Imagine having 10 people in a room, and you're in that room for 3 hours once a week. It's a long time. We start the meeting off by everyone staring what's going on in their kind of neck of the woods, like things that would be important for everyone else around the table to know. So it goes back to that kind of transparency of information, the sharing of information. But we do it because it lets everyone know what's going on, and people use it for, it could be something personal that's going on that they share. It could be something that's going on in their office, could be a new person they just hired. But we take that moment, and it, it varies. That one part of our meeting may last, if it goes really short, which it doesn't go short often, but that might be 30 minutes. But most likely it's an hour, and then we break, and and then we get to the kind of business of the day. But what we found in that is it just centers everyone that you're not alone in this work. That as people are sharing, oftentimes what happens is that other people start to raise their hand and say, "Oh, well, I can help you with that," or "Do you need some guidance?" or "Here's an idea, here's your thought." It becomes an opportunity for everyone to kind of engage with each other. Like I said, it is a long meeting for once a week, but we find that it's been really helpful, and I think it goes to the ability to prepare. One of the things that I'll say that we use that time with that I think is helpful in terms of the way that we manage and lead is we do a lot of prep. Like before a big meeting, we will walk through every presentation before we go out. And then after I'm thinking in particular about board meetings. We have a series of board meetings like 3 to 4 times a year. After the weekend, we then go through every single event that took place, big or small, and talk about what worked, what didn't work, how can we make it better, could we have changed things. It's painful. And similarly, like I will present whatever I'm going to talk about. I will share my PowerPoint, and I have everyone to critique it. That's also painful. It's humbling, but what I know happens is once we all have a chance to kind of weigh in, the final product is far better. I mean, it's so much better having everyone's feedback, but everyone's a part of it. And by doing that, and by creating this environment where everyone feels comfortable to share, I believe we create a much stronger leadership team.
So I do the very same thing. I'll just add one added piece to it. There's a level of modeling that you have to do, right? And so a rule for me is to never ask my team members to do anything I'm not willing to do. And in fact, often I need to model it if I'm gonna ask them to do it, right? So that becomes a norm. And the second piece is not asking your team members to leave important aspects of who they are at the door for the meeting. So you are entering into the meeting space as your whole self, bringing everything that's impacting how you're showing up today. So we begin our weekly staff meetings with a check-in, and that check-in is a free check-in. Whatever's going on in your life, like you feel comfortable, you want to share, they're encouraged to share. That takes a lot of time, and so you have to commit to that. And I think you also have to establish some norms so there's some consistency to it, so your team's not surprised, because there'll be enough surprises that you can't control. So you don't want to do things that's going to surprise them. So those are a couple of things that I try to keep in mind, but modeling it is a key part of that.
Thank you very much, Andy and Frank. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I really admire how intentional the both of you are in terms of empowering the people in your team, right? And I think now is the best time to bring in the theme of this whole conference. And I want to understand how you use your platform to empower young people and especially women in the workspace.
Well, I work in an environment that is, I'd probably say 65, 35, women to men in higher education. Surprisingly, that is the case. You might think it was otherwise. And I try to do a couple of things. One, being a mentor means that you create opportunities for your team to lead, right? And so I'm constantly providing platforms, providing opportunities to showcase the talent on my team. I heard a leader recently talk about your job as a leader is to work yourself into silence, meaning that you've done such a good job empowering your team that they embody and lead in ways that you don't have to anymore. So you've done such a good job empowering your team. And I try to do that. When I think about preparing the next generation of academics, it's creating opportunities for co-publications, co-presentations. If you look at my CV, I rarely have I published by myself. Majority of my publications are with my students or other colleagues, and that's the way to leverage the influence that I bring to the space, so that others can have their opportunity to show their talents. I'm a coach at heart. I used to coach kids in track and field and basketball, and I take that approach with my students. My job is to get my team to be the best versions of themselves, and that doesn't mean that you take a one-size approach. Some of my former students would claim that I hazed them in the process of training them, and then I say, which award did you win the other day? Which is a way of speaking back to the investment that we collectively made. So part of that is knowing what are the right buttons to push, but I think the biggest thing we can do is sponsorship, creating opportunities, and unleashing, I said this earlier, unleashing the talents that are in our team members.
Yeah, great. That's great, Frank. Yeah, I think the ability to use the platform is one that I don't take for granted. As president, I do have a lot of kind of leeway, and I use it in a way that I think is beneficial for our women leaders and their ability to kind of grow and develop and be leaders of their own in their own right. But it's also something that you can't just start when you reach a certain level. Like, similar to Frank, as you think about, this is just something that you do from the very start. You do it as a coach or a mentor, you do it as a colleague, supporting one another, speaking up for someone when they may not speak up for themselves. You do it privately and publicly. If I've had the opportunity to build lots of leadership teams over many, many years, over 30 years. Some of those teams are really small, some of them have been really large. But if you look back, I would say most of the partnerships, my colleagues, fellow leaders have been women. And some of that starts with when you're hiring people, looking at the portfolio of talent. And I look at trying to help the rising star, someone that that may have great potential but needs some additional work. A lot of times people, I see it all the time. I just saw this happen recently. And in most cases I'll step in and I'll make a point. Other times I'm also trying to empower the leaders that are around you, but there are times where I will make additions to great people. There's one woman of color in that group, there's maybe two other folks that are not, that are two men. I will push on that, and There have been times where I'll say, well, no, I really think you need to hire this person, and here's why. And a lot of times people don't see the potential and also what it means for the team. I think sometimes people are just so focused on a particular role, and they're not able to step back to see the potential for what a different perspective will add to the entire organization. And it's important to do that. I'm also one of the folks, like, I look around my organization, and I'm a big believer in sometimes you have to in order to grow, you gotta go. And not all the times people recognize that, but what I try to do there is to say, well, what are the skills that you don't have right now? And how do we go about ensuring that you have them? Because there may not be an opportunity for you to continue growing at this organization, but let's make sure that you have all the skills necessary for you to be successful somewhere else. And I'm also always looking, and this is maybe, I want more people to deal with the stresses of a presidency, as I've mentioned to Frank too, but I have one of the leaders on my team, and I will ask them about, like, especially if I believe that they have the goods. I said, I believe that you can be a president. And sometimes people just need to hear that, and I have several women on my team right now that I've been saying that, and then at every moment when I see things, I'm saying, well, that is what you just did there, is what presidents need to do, and you just did it flawlessly in your own way. And because there is no kind of model of a president. There's no model of a leader. Like, you can be that leader and do it really well. And so, being able to kind of support people in that thinking and that belief, I think goes really well. But I think anytime that you have a position where you can either hire someone, hire a woman. I will tell you that a lot of the consultants that I hire, I look for women-owned businesses. One of the great consultants I have right now, that's actually filling in for, she was a fundraising consultant that I've worked with over time, and I brought her in at this particular institution. We had a leadership change. She's now the interim VP within my organization, but she bought this firm years ago, but it's now a wholly owned, women-owned organization. That was a conscious choice. And so when you have the ability to do those things, do it. And don't hesitate in doing it. And be proud that you're able to do it. And tell others that you're doing it, because you want to encourage them to be able to make those kinds of courageous moves. And it will never backfire on you. And if it does, just keep doing it. Don't stop, because you're giving opportunities to people that need it, that oftentimes they don't get those opportunities. So, take the risk, and then support them in that role, and support them in that endeavor. The last story I'll end with is I hired recently a woman into a vice president role. This was her first vice president role. In the pool, there were two other sitting VPs, and yet I chose this one person, African American woman, to take the role. I also knew that, like, her talents were great. I made the mistake of bragging too much about how great she was. And she's now leaving to go to another organization. One of my colleagues and friends at another organization, a consulting firm, called me up and said, Andy, I remember you told me how great she was. So I hate to tell you, but I put her name in for another job. But I'm excited for her success. And before she's going to leave right now, but the college funded her to go to a conference that was really expensive, but it was all about creating future higher ed leaders. But I engaged and supported her in that effort, and never will look back, because guess what? It's going to be beneficial for the organization over time, because we're developing talent from within, whether that stays in the place or whether it goes other places. It's great for the industry. So, I lean in on it. I take advantage of the platform. I don't make any, I don't, second guess it. I lean in on it because I think it's really important. Because different perspectives matter, and on a leadership team, I think it's really, really important, so. Sorry to ramble.
I think our guests deserve a huge round of applause. Thank you. Okay, guys, if you have any questions, this is the opportunity. Who's want to go first?
Hello. First, thank you. Happy birthday. I'm really inspired about the way you approach everything. I'm really impressed as I wanted to. I already teach and mentor students and know how much it's important to this relationship. Sometimes it's as close as a father-child relationship. So I just wanna just thank you for this talk, for being here and for sharing these things with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Oh, right there. Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing. It was really inspiring. It was great. My name is Victoria. I work in sort of corporate consulting environment. I have a comment and a question. I think first of all, I just wanted to reflect on the question that was about making hard decisions and sort of how do you choose between being tough or being kind of deeply human. And I just want to say that it's just, I feel that we need to reframe it because like, it's not binary. And actually, when you're having these very tough conversations, tough choices, that's when it's critical to bring humanity into it. When you're laying people off, when you're giving tough feedback to someone who's underperforming, when you're having tough conversations with your husband, with your kids, that's right. Like these are the moments where you need to bring humanity, empathy into these moments. That was sort of my reflection. And the question that I had was about modeling. How do you guys show up and how do you stay this model when you are running on empty? Because in some environments, you can show vulnerability, but in others, when you're working with clients, when you're working with, like huge, very intense projects, you can't really. So just, like a bit of advice. What do you do when you are low on energy?
Looks like Frank is looking up at the screen. Thanks for your comment and question. There are several things that are running through my head on this one. The first one, and when you're referring to kind of difficult conversations, let's just pause on the moment of and acknowledge the importance of having those difficult conversations, because so many times I see colleagues and friends that don't do it, that they are conflict averse. And while I will tell you I do not like conflict, but I'm also one that will run towards it, because in those moments, whatever the scenario, facing it head on is the only way to deal with it. And when I do model the behavior of whether it's a parent that's upset or another faculty members that's sending fiery emails, or an alumnus that is upset with a decision that's been made. Lots of times people say, well, just ignore it, or maybe just have someone send a message, or, send a statement that goes to everyone so you don't address it. My default on these moments is to have a conversation. I run towards that. I go face to face if I can do it. I'll try to do it sitting down with one another. That's how I try to model how you lead. You lead by example. You lead by saying, well, all right, here's someone that's really, really upset. You know what I found in those moments? Half the time, people just want to be heard. And just you showing up to say, listen, I understand X and Y, can you help me understand the rest of the story? And then stop talking and listen. That type of empathetic leadership, I think, goes such a long way. So I just wanted to just first say, you know, we should acknowledge that the ability to have those tough conversations is more than half of the way forward. So that's one step. I'd say on the running empty, and I'm gonna say something that might go against what you all are hearing, so forgive me in advance for sharing it, but I think it's important. You know, a lot of times you hear people talk a lot about, there are lots of books written about this, the importance of work-life balance. I support that. I think that's exactly right. I think that creates healthy organizations. And here's the pause and the pivot. If you're trying to be, you know, a leader and someone that's trying to really create transformative change or create really impactful kind of changing and opportunities, sometimes you gotta lean in, and the hours are longer, which is one of the reasons why you wanna pursue life's work that doesn't feel like work, because when you're running on empty, sometimes your greatest work will happen in those moments when people recognize that you've got a lot of things on your mind, a lot of things on your shoulders, but you're still taking the time to go meet with that extra student, or to go take that time, even though Frank was on a cruise or whatever he was on that boat, but he took the moment and that opportunity to pause, to have a conversation with someone about a book that turned into some powerful leadership moments. And it's in those moments when you're thinking that it doesn't really matter, or since this is the one-off, that you never know what can be a powerful changing moment. So even when you're running on empty, you still say yes. And like I said, this doesn't support the work-life balance, but I do think when you're really trying to create lasting change, powerful impact, kind of leaning in when you don't necessarily want to lean in can really create great change. So thanks for the question.
Quickly, if you're running on empty and it does happen, it can be a little late. And so my advice is to have some boundaries established, the non-negotiables for you. They have to be reasonable and appropriate for the context you're in. So you can't work for an organization when you're on call 24/7 and say, I'm not going to be on call 24/7, right? So that's not realistic. But within that context, being clear about what your no's are and sticking to those, right? So that's one. The second is, and this just supports what Andy said, you have to lean into the conflict. One of the most difficult things for me early on in my career was to let someone go who had helped recruit me to the organization. And this person was invested in the organization as the way it was, and I was trying to bring it in a different direction, and that required a really hard, painful conversation. But we got through it to the point where that individual was able to ask me to serve as a reference. So as painful as that situation was, we came through it with an understanding that allowed them to have some trust in me to support where they were going next. And if you do that, you recognize the moment and you prioritize their humanity in that situation. As difficult as it is, you'll come through.
I think one big final thank you for both of our guests. And one thank you for the organization from my side, because I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to have a conversation with the both of you. You guys have had wonderful experiences. I love your anecdotes, and I think I've learned a lot about leadership. The other side of leadership.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. we're gonna ask, we're actually running super late, and Nadine from the other side.
Yeah. And I'm like,
It's
for somebody else, yeah.
So if you could just stay, please, unless you need to use ladies or men. Okay, thank you, Andy, thank you. Frank.
That we are running late, that you can just quickly go outside and come back.
What do we have now? Panel.
Yeah, I think people are leaving. So. Please, come, show me before you go. Your shirt.
I will send you the link.
Is it bought or from Nigeria? Yeah. From Nigeria. Because some Nigerian,
Yes, so Nigerian tailors
it's not tailor like designers. Have you seen the design coming out of Nigeria?
Oh, no, for sure. Like, they are crazy. They are crazy.
Beautiful piece.
Very nice.
Yes. I stretch my legs.